Okay, dear students, hello and welcome to this video lecture series. On behalf of Project SATHEE, I am Dr. Animesh, and today we are going to begin with our third module and very interesting module. Till now, we have been discussing basics of criminal law. We discussed basics of crime. We discussed the general exceptions, and this is what we are talking about. Now we have come to the learning of actual crime offenses. So, to say in the layman terms, we're talking about the main course of criminal law. So, obviously, we are starting with the most important topic in the criminal law, most interesting and most important. Even in your law school, you will enjoy a very, very elaborate discussion. Generally, teachers take 15-20 classes discussing this topic, culpable homicide, because this is very interesting. Many cases in this particular offenses are registered in India, and most heinous, most important crime that is there, the most severe, most heinous crime that you can imagine. That is the crime we are discussing today. That is culpable homicide, killing a human being. We are going to learn. Obviously, this lecture is divided into two parts for your convenience, to for a better understanding. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Yes, homicide. Understanding homicide is a very, very important issue. So, obviously, first thing that we have to understand is the term, meaning of the term homicide. What it means what do we mean by homicide? Now, homicide comes from two words, very important. It's in Latin, two words. One is homo, another is pseudo. Now, homo refers to Homo sapiens, means human being, while the pseudo means to cut. Now, to cut, to kill. Now, obviously, in ancient times, the most common way of killing a human being was to cut him. So, cutting or killing a human being is essentially considered as homicide. So, homicide it is very, very essential that somebody dies. If nobody is killed, nobody is dead. The question of homicide is not there. Even if you inflicted very serious injury on someone, but that person survived, it means there is no homicide. Homicide के लिए व्यक्ति का मरना बहुत बहुत जरूरी है. If the person about whose homicide the offense is created, if that person is alive, there is no question of homicide. जब तक मरे नहीं तक homicide नहीं होता. दूसरी बात, that even if a person dies by the slightest injury, that will be considered homicide. Death is most important thing in homicide. ये समझ. So to kill a human, to cause the death of a human is considered homicide. This is most important. Now, the term of the offense is culpable homicide. What constitutes culpable homicide? What it means to be culpable? Now, culpable can be understood in two senses. Culpable means different from justifiable or lawful homicide. Now, here we can understand there are some homicides which are lawful, means the doing of that homicide is not considered criminal. So I'll give you 3-4 examples of that. First example is the most basic, most ancient example, is to kill a war is not homicide. Kill a war, if there is a war going on and somebody kills someone, a soldier kills another soldier, that is not considered homicide because that is considered as lawful homicide. To kill in a war is not murder. Similarly, doing lawful homicide in private defense, to kill someone. If you kill someone in execution of a lawful order, like an executioner who is giving death penalty, who is hanging someone. अगर एक जल्लाद किसी को hangman, if he hangs someone for the offense, for an offense for which he has been convicted, the deceased has been convicted by a court of law, then if a hangman hangs that person, whether the hangman has committed homicide, answer is yes, but that is not culpable. That homicide is lawful homicide. Culpable homicide is different from lawful homicide because in culpable homicide, culpa means liability, guilt. So culpable homicide is a homicide for which there is a guilt. Guilt means liability. That homicide is a wrongful homicide. गलत तरीके से किसी को मारना. Killing a human being in itself, homicide in itself is not a crime unless it is culpable. Culpable means there is something to attach criminal liability. अगर वो criminal liability attached नहीं हो सकती, that is not considered a proper homicide. In order to consider it a proper homicide, it must be clearly understood that there should be some liability attached. If there's no liability attached, it is not a homicide. It's not a homicide. Okay. So हमने देखा private defense, executioner, somebody, if an army personnel kills somebody in an encounter, obviously that is not homicide, culpable homicide. That is not a homicide, but that is a homicide, but it's not culpable. So in order to punish someone, it must be a culpable homicide. Now the term culpable has another meaning as well. The term culpable की इसको other meaning ऐसे कहें, culpable means intentional as, and it differentiates culpable homicide from accidental homicide. There is something called accidental homicide and there is something called culpable homicide. If you kill somebody without intending to kill, that is not culpable homicide. Culpable homicide को हम distinguish करते हैं justified homicide से और accidental homicide से भी, है ना. Suppose something your car's brakes fail and you hit someone. Now that homicide is accidental homicide. It's not culpable homicide. So in order to consider an homicide is a culpable homicide, there must be some kind of intent and there must be guilt attached to it. Guilt होना चाहिए. अगर guilt नहीं हो तो culpable नहीं हो. अगर कोई justification है या वो homicide accidental है तो liability नहीं आएगी. That is the primary meaning of culpable homicide. अब culpable homicide बच्चों दो तरीके के होते हैं, दो प्रकार. Culpable homicide are of two kinds. Number 3 and number 4 actually gives that idea that culpable homicide can, number 1, it can be amounting to murder, or number 2, when it does not amount to murder. दोनों तरीके के homicide हो सकते हैं. Number 1, when it amounts to murder, another when it does not amount to murder. So we'll learn when it amounts to murder, when it does not amount to murder, but first we'll look into the question of what is culpable homicide. Then we can talk whether it amounts to murder or not. आप देखिए मर्डर और कल्पेबल होमिसाइड में वही रिलेशनशिप है जो इन अ वेन डायग्राम इज अ रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन अ स्मॉलर सर्कल एंड अ लार्जर सर्कल. सपोज आपने obviously how many of you I know about Venn diagram, I don't know, but a Venn diagram is a very interesting thing. In a Venn diagram you can actually portray that whether one thing overlaps another. So in respect of murder and culpable homicide, the term that is often used is all murders are culpable homicides, but all culpable homicides are not murder. So culpable homicide is a bigger circle and murder is a smaller circle within that. So all culpable homicides are not murder, but all murders are culpable homicide. We'll discuss how it is in the next few minutes. Okay. Ingredients of culpable homicide. सबसे पहले समझिए culpable homicide होता क्या है. When we will consider that a person has committed culpable homicide. Number 1, essential element. Causes death. In order to fix liability for culpable homicide, the first thing that has to be proved is causing death. अब ये causing death का क्या मतलब होता है बच्चों? Now we have discussed in the very beginning, in the very starting lectures, that there is something called causation. Causation means there has to be a cause and effect relationship between two things. यानी कि ये चीज हुई है तो इसका कारण ये. So in order to prove culpable homicide, the first thing the prosecution will have to establish, is that the accused, the criminal who is on trial for culpable homicide, has caused the death of the victim. सबसे पहली चीज जो उनको साबित करनी पड़ेगी कि भाई जो व्यक्ति का देहांत हुआ है, द डिसीज, उसकी डेथ कॉज हुई है बाय द एक्शंस ऑफ अक्यूज. If the death of the deceased and the actions of the accused are two separate and distinct, then उस पे liability नहीं बनती. Cause this means that the death should be the direct and immediate result of the actions of the accused. Accused ने ही death cause की है deceased की, you will have to prove that death is the direct result of the actions of the accused. अगर actions of the accused have not led to the death of the person, accused का action की वजह से death नहीं हुई है, किसी और वजह से death हुई है ना. जैसे कि the accused dies of a heart attack, of a cardiac arrest. Suppose there is a person, let's say, is a thief. अभी हाल में ऐसा एक इंसिडेंट आया था. अब suppose there is a person who is a thief. Now he snatches the wallet of a person and he's running away. Okay. Now the other person whose wallet is stolen, the victim, tries to pursue him. वो उसके पीछे दौड़ता है. Now while running, he suffers a cardiac arrest and he falls to the ground and dies. Very much possible. एक व्यक्ति का ए ने बी का पर्स चुरा करके भागने लगा, बी ने उसका पीछा किया, बी को हार्ट अटैक हो गया और बी का हो गया देहांत. नाउ द क्वेश्चन इज वेदर ए हैज कॉज्ड द डेथ ऑफ बी और नॉट. ए ने बी की डेथ कॉज की या नहीं की. इफ द आंसर इज यस, that yes, so that will give us a very absurd kind of understanding. क्या किसी के पर्स चुराने का डायरेक्ट रिजल्ट होता है कि सामने वाले की हार्ट अटैक हो जाए? आंसर इज नो. Actually, B didn't die because of the actions of A, but rather he died because of cardiac arrest. तो हार्ट अटैक हो जाना और पर्स चुराना आपस में रिलेटेड नहीं है. इसीलिए यहाँ पे जो थीफ था उसने डेथ कॉज नहीं की सामने वाले, क्योंकि पर्स चुराना और हार्ट अटैक में कोई रिलेशनशिप नहीं. बट सपोज आई स्टैब्ड समवन एंड दैट पर्सन ब्लेड टू डेथ. Now, obviously, if you stab someone, that person will bleed, and that person excessive bleeding may lead to death. तो यहाँ पे I have caused the death of the person or not? The answer is yes. अगर मैंने किसी को चाकू मारा और वो ब्लीड कर गया, उसका खून बहते बहते वो मर गया, तो मैंने डेथ कॉज की या नहीं की? बिल्कुल की, क्योंकि मेरे एक्शन का डायरेक्ट रिजल्ट उसकी डेथ. लेकिन अगर किसी थीफ ने किसी का वॉलेट चुराया और भाग रहा था वो, और उसका पीछा कर रहा था डिसीज्ड या विक्टिम, और उसकी कार्डियक अरेस्ट से डेथ हो गई, तो थीफ ने उसका डेथ कॉज नहीं किया. सो कॉजिंग डेथ इज समथिंग वेरी एसेंशियल, वेरी मैंडेटरी, वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. if you have not caused the death, then the question of culpable homicide will not emerge. People die because of n number of reasons, but the liability is there only when आपके एक्शन की वजह से सामने वाले की डेथ हो. और आपके एक्शन जो है रिमोट रीजन नहीं होने चाहिए. मीन्स कि चलो ये भी तो फैक्टर है कि भाई ऐसा होता कि अगर उसने उसका पर्स न चुराया होता तो वो पीछे न भागता तो कार्डियक अरेस्ट ना होता. ये लॉजिक नहीं चलता क्रिमिनल लॉ में. लॉजिक चलता है कि क्या इसके एक्शन का डायरेक्ट रिजल्ट वो है या नहीं, वेदर ए रिजल्ट्स इन बी और नॉट. इफ द ए डज नॉट रिजल्ट इन बी, देयर इज there is some other factor involved in it, then the liability is not there. मैंने किसी को कोई बुरी खबर सुनाई, उसको हार्ट अटैक हो गया. In that case, whether I will be held liable? The answer is no. मैंने उसको बुरी खबर सुनाई, इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि हमेशा व्यक्ति का की डेथ हो जाएगी. That person is overly sensitive. I can't do anything about it. Suppose there is a person who proposes another person. I am recording this video on the eve of Valentine's Day. Suppose somebody proposes someone and the other person rejects him or her. अब रिजेक्ट कर दिया, इसने नस काट ली. हमारे obviously the new generation does not know these things, but in our times, in our generation, this used to happen very frequently. People used to threaten कि नस काट लेंगे. But suppose actually that happens. There is a boy who proposes a girl and says, see, I love you and I want to be in a relationship with you. The girl says, no, दफा हो जाओ. The boy slits his wrist, so and dies. So what is the liability of the girl? Answer: there is no liability, because rejecting a romantic advance does not result in death. That person died because of his own reason. So causing death is considered something very important. That is fundamental to the prosecution of culpable homicide. If there is no causing of death, then there is no liability. That is point number one. Number two is the element of intent. And there are three conditions out of which one must be satisfied. Causing death is must, mandatory condition. Then we have three conditions जिसके साथ लिखा है और, अगर आप अपनी स्लाइड पे देख रहे होंगे, with the intention of causing death or intent of causing such bodily injury creating likelihood of death or with knowledge that there is likelihood of death. So there is an or. Or means any one of these conditions should be fulfilled in order to constitute culpable homicide. इन तीन में से कोई एक कंडीशन भी अगर फुलफिल हो गई तो हम कहेंगे कि क्या हुआ, कल्पेबल होमिसाइड की रिक्वायरमेंट फुलफिल हो गई, लाइबिलिटी बने. क्या कंडीशन? फर्स्ट इज व्हेन अ पर्सन कॉजेज डेथ विथ एन इंटेंशन ऑफ कॉजिंग डेथ. मींस सपोज एक व्यक्ति ने दूसरे व्यक्ति की डेथ कॉज कर दी और इसलिए और डेथ कॉज करने के पीछे उसका इंटेंट भी डेथ कॉज करने का था. Intent of the causing death means that this person, the accused, actually wanted the other person, the deceased, as dead. वो चाहता था कि उसकी डेथ हो जाए, ना सिर्फ उसको ये मालूम था. इंटेंट इज नॉलेज प्लस डिजायर टू अचीव. नॉलेज के बारे में क्या पढ़ा? नॉलेज सिंपली मीन्स इफ यू नो व्हाट इज द कॉन्सिक्वेंस ऑफ योर एक्शन, बट एट द सेम टाइम इफ यू डिजायर दोज कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस means you want that thing to happen. In that case, it will be considered that your act is intentional. Meaning thereby, if suppose in a particular case, there's a person who causes the death of another, and it is clear by evidences that A actually wanted B to be dead. He wanted that B should be dead. In that case, it will be considered a culpable homicide because there is a clear intention of causing death. दूसरा, अगर ये प्रोसिक्यूशन साबित नहीं कर पाता कि the death was intentional, the accused actually wanted the deceased dead, then they can prove that the person who is the accused wanted to inflict such bodily injury, शरीर को ऐसा नुकसान पहुंचाना चाहते थे, that there is a likelihood of death. जैसे कि सपोज अक्यूज्ड और डिसीज्ड का झगड़ा है. डिसीज मतलब जो विक्टिम जिसके देहांत हो गया. अक्यूज्ड और डिसीज्ड का झगड़ा है. नाउ अक्यूज्ड टेक्स अ डंडा and a wooden stick and hits the deceased on his head. Now the deceased dies. Now the question comes in the front of the court whether he has caused culpable homicide or not, whether he is liable for culpable homicide or not. The first thing that the accused will say कि नहीं सर, मुझे मारने का इंटेंट नहीं था, मुझे गुस्सा आया, मुझे लगा कि आई शुड टीच दैट पर्सन अ लेसन, तो मैंने डंडा उठाया और सर पे मार दिया. Now whether this is culpable homicide or not, the court will say, okay, fine. The other person was your friend or your enemy and there is no evidence that you actually wanted that person dead. But nonetheless, you wanted to hit him by the wooden stick on his head. Now because of that, your intent to cause that injury, it is clear that the injury that you inflicted, it creates a likelihood of death. क्यों? क्योंकि किसी के सर पे आप डंडा मारे तो there is a possibility that the person might die. There is a likelihood that the person might die. And because of this fact, this particular action will be considered to be of a culpable homicide. कि भाई भले ही आपकी नीयत ये नहीं थी कि सामने वाला मर जाए, पर आपकी ये तो नीयत थी कि आप उसका डंडा सर पे मारे. अगर आपने डंडा सर पे मारा और मतलब जान समझ करके मारा और वो व्यक्ति मर गया तो आपने कल्पेबल होमिसाइड किया. इवन इफ यू डिडंट वांट दैट पर्सन टू डाई, आपने उसके सर पे डंडा जानबूझकर मारा, योर लाइबिलिटी विल बी देयर. एंड थर्ड मॉर में है with knowledge that the act is likely to cause death. If it was well within your knowledge that the act that you have done is likely to cause death. Likelihood to cause death means suppose I did something which I know is capable of causing the death of the person. Suppose मुझको पता है कि the person in front of me has a very high blood sugar और मैं उसको बिल्कुल मिठाई जबरदस्ती खिलाता हूँ. So I know that because of high sugar spice there can be multiple organ failure and the person might die. So here I have the knowledge. I have not inflicted any bodily injury, but I have knowledge that what I am doing is capable of causing death of that person. अब वो नॉलेज जो है जनरल भी हो सकती है, स्पेसिफिक भी हो सकती है. जैसे मुझे पता है कि गिविंग सपोज that person has taken some medicine and I am giving that person another medicine that is supposed to react with that medicine. और हमको पता है दोनों मेडिसिन के रिएक्शन से उसकी डेथ भी हो सकती है. In that case, it will be considered that I have done an act with her knowledge that my act is likely to cause death. So in that case, my action will be considered of culpable homicide. Specific knowledge बच्चों कैसे हो सकती है? Specific knowledge is in respect of the deceased. मुझे पता है कि deceased को इस particular medicine से allergy है, but I still administer that medicine to the deceased. It means I have specific knowledge. So if you have knowledge that your act is likely to cause the death of other person, in that case, it will be considered that you have caused culpable homicide. ना अगर आपको पता है, जैसे कि मुझको पता है कि अगर मैं कोई इनहेरेंटली डेंजरस एक्ट करूं, इनहेरेंटली डेंजरस एक्ट जैसे कि मैं अपने छत पर से बड़े बड़े पत्थर नीचे फेंक रहा हूं, तो मुझको पता है कि ये पत्थर अगर और नीचे एक बिजी स्ट्रीट है, रोड है, मुझको पता है कि दैट इफ दिस stone falls on someone that may cause death of the person, so it creates a likelihood of death. So my knowledge is that this particular stone can fall on the head of someone, that person might die, and I'm still throwing stones from my roof onto a busy street. In that case, and if actually that stone hits someone and that person dies, that will be considered as culpable homicide. तो यहाँ पे बच्चों आप लोगों को देखना पड़ेगा कि पहला तो कॉज डेथ तो आपने की हो, इन तीनों में से कौन सा क्राइटेरिया फुलफिल हो रहा है, whether the act is such that there is intention of causing death or it has intention of causing such bodily injury that creates a likelihood of death, or the accused had such knowledge that what he is doing is creates a likelihood of death. अगर मुझे पता है कि जो मैं कर रहा हूं इससे डेथ की संभावना है और मैंने वो फिर भी किया, इन दैट केस आई हैव व्हाट आई हैव डन इज कल्पेबल होमिसाइड. बहुत ध्यान से समझिएगा इसको. पहला इंग्रेडिएंट जो है वो है कॉज इज डेथ, दैट इज मैंडेटरी प्रोविजन. मैंडेटरी इन द सेंस कॉज इज डेथ तो प्रूफ करना ही करना पड़ेगा, बट देन there are three conditions out of which one must be satisfied. Either the act done by the person is intentional, फिर तो कल्पेबल होमिसाइड है. दूसरा, अगर सपोज डेथ इंटेंशनल ना भी हो तो भी उसने जो बॉडली इंजरी की है, there is a very famous case of Bharatiya. This is an old case in which what happens, there is a man, 17-18-year-old man, and he had a 15-16-year-old wife. Now one day he started beating his wife, the husband, and he pins his wife to the ground, उसको जमीन पर लेटाता है, and he gives several punches on her face. Now face पे punches मारता है तो obviously because of that her skull gets damaged. Skull gets damaged near eye and skull gets damaged and she bleeds into her brain and she dies. Now the husband said, after he was arrested and he was put to trial, husband said, see, I just wanted to teach her a lesson, in the sense that I used to beat her at earlier times as well, and I was just angry with her and I wanted to beat her so that she will modify her behavior or something. but I never wanted her dead. But the court said, see, you consciously gave her many blows on the face. आपने उसके चेहरे पर बहुत बार बहुत तेज पंचेस मारे. You knew what we were doing. Your intent was to inflict bodily injury. And those bodily injuries were of such a nature that it created a likelihood of death. So you will be liable for culpable homicide. This is what the court said. And court was very clear in that. तो अगर आप ऐसा काम करते हैं जिससे कि लाइक्लीहुड ऑफ डेथ क्रिएट हो जाती है, ऐसी बॉडली इंजरी इन्फ्लिक्ट करते हैं, मीन्स बॉडी के सेंसिटिव पार्ट पे अटैक कर रहे हैं, किसी वेपन से अटैक कर रहे हैं, इन दैट केस इट बिकम्स क्लियर दैट व्हाट द पर्सन इंटेंडेड. पर अगर मैं किसी के टांगों पर छड़ी से मार रहा हूं, ऑब्वियसली इवन इफ बाय सम वेट द पर्सन डाइज, आई विल नॉट बी हेल्ड लाइबल because my intent was not to cause such bodily injury which is likely to cause death. Suppose मैंने किसी के पीठ पर मुक्का मारा, तो obviously my intent was not to cause such, or suppose उस मुक्का मारा and the person chokes and the person dies. Now my intent was not to cause such bodily injury which creates a likelihood of death. So I'll not be held liable for culpable homicide. That may happen. Okay, moving on. Yes. Now, when we are considering culpable homicide, we have to understand two, three more things. First is the liability for acceleration of death. अब इसका क्या मतलब होता है? Now, acceleration simply means speeding something up. किसी चीज की गति बढ़ाना, उसको कहते हैं acceleration. So, culpable homicide, the provision for culpable homicide states that suppose if somebody is already dying, means that person is already injured, is already informed, and is moving towards his death. And there is someone who accelerates that death. कोई व्यक्ति already बहुत घायल है and is about to die, and you go and बहती गंगा में आप हाथ धोते हैं, 2 पंचेस आप भी मारते हैं, and that person dies immediately. Let's say. So what you have done, you have accelerated the death. Then you will be also considered liable for culpable homicide if you accelerate the death of someone. सिमिलरली मैं आपको एग्जांपल देता हूँ बच्चों, आप लोगों ने सबने हिंदी फिल्में देखी होंगी ढेर सारे. उसमें क्या होता है, देयर सम वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पर्सन, the villain reaches into the, and that suppose that hero or that important person is very injured and they are in hospital, they have that oxygen mask, और विलेन चुपचाप जाता है और ऑक्सीजन मास्क हटा देता है, वेंटिलेटर बंद कर देता है ना, या फिर जो मेडिसिन उस पर जा रही हो मेडिसिन कुछ कर देता है. That is all considered acceleration of death. If by your own conduct you accelerated the death, means that the death was either way coming, it was highly likely that the person would have died even without that intervention. अगर आपने वो 2 पंचेस न मारे होते, ऑक्सीजन मास्क न हटाया होता, वेंटिलेटर बंद न किया होता, in any case the result would have been death. But still, if you have accelerated the death, in that case your liability will be there for culpable homicide. अगर आपने बहती गंगा में हाथ धो लिया, if you cause death of someone and by the way of accelerating their death, in that case your liability will be medical intervention. Now this is again a very interesting topic. Medical intervention, the topic or the stipulation explanation of medical intervention says that suppose somebody causes injury to someone, ठीक है, किसी ने किसी को इंजोर कर दिया, and that person, the injured person, dies out of that injury, then the possibility of skillful medical treatment is ignored while understanding the liability, while fixing the liability on the accused. अब ये क्या हुआ, मतलब ये समझिए कि suppose I stabbed someone, okay, and that person bled to death, ठीक है, उसको का खून बहता रहा, वो मर गया. Now it is equally true that if that person would have got immediate medical attention and skillful treatment, that person's life would have been saved. Means if I stabbed someone and that person is immediately would have taken to the hospital and doctors would have operated on him, that person may have been saved. So whether my liability will be there for culpable homicide or not, the answer is that my liability will be there for culpable homicide, irrespective of the fact that by skillful treatment, the disease, death of that disease could have been avoided. हम जो है बच्चों मेडिकल इंटरवेंशन को इग्नोर करके चलते हैं। मतलब कोई भी अक्यूज जो कि लाया गया है कोर्ट में फॉर कल्पेबल होमिसाइड फॉर मर्डर, दे कैनॉट से कि सर अगर जिसकी डेथ हुई है अगर उसको डॉक्टर अच्छा मिल जाता या टाइम पे मिल जाता तो वो बच जाता, इसलिए मेरी लाइबिलिटी नहीं। कोर्ट कहती है हम मेडिकल इंटरवेंशन को नॉन एग्जिस्टेंट मानकर चलते हैं। आपने क्यों इंजरी इन्फ्लिक्ट की सामने वाले पे कि उसको मेडिकल इंटरवेंशन करना पड़े? Because if we will allow this argument to take hold, everyone will take this argument कि भाई हाँ हाँ अरे सर बिल्कुल अगर उसको हॉस्पिटल ले जाते और जो डॉक्टर उनको मिला उससे और अच्छा डॉक्टर मिलता, दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा सर्जन मिल जाता, in that case the person would have been saved. Court says कि the law says that we ignore all these possibilities. We are completely indifferent. We do not want to consider the fact that if medical intervention hota तो क्या होता, whether the person would have died, would have lived. Because there was no medical intervention, the person died. But obviously the person died because of the injury that you inflicted. अगर आपने कोई भी injury inflict की and the person dies because of that, then you will be held liable and you cannot blame it on the lack of medical necessity, medical arrangements, medical intervention. ये नहीं कह सकते कि सर डॉक्टर साहब होते तो बच जाता, है ना, तुम होती तो ऐसा होता, तुम होती तो वैसा होता. All these khayals you should not harbor, you should not entertain all these khayals. Okay, that is clear, I hope. And third is death of an infant. Death of an infant बच्चों ऐसा है कि suppose if there's a very small child and that child is in a mother's womb, obviously not a child yet, that particular fetus, जब तक कोई बच्चा मदर की वूम में होता है, that child is considered as fetus. So fetus को kill करना, causing harm to a fetus is called miscarriage. Miscarriage. So if somebody causes miscarriage, that is a separate offense. That is not considered homicide because that child is the mother's womb. हम लोग उसको क्या कहते हैं? हम लोग उसको कहते हैं मिसकैरेज ही कहते हैं और मेडिकल टर्मिनेशन ऑफ प्रेगनेंसी कहते हैं. लेकिन let's suppose a particular child is killed after that child is born. In that case, what we call it infanticide, है ना? Infanticide जो है उसमें बच्चों culpable homicide का प्रोविजन लगता है. The provision of culpable homicide is applicable on the cases in which a child is killed immediately after any part of that child is taken out of the mother's womb. If a child, any part of that child's body is taken out of the mother's womb, killing that child will be considered homicide. Even though the child might not have been completely born. See, in medical terms, the child is considered completely born when that umbilical cord between the child and the mother is cut. The moment the umbilical cord is cut, the child is considered born. But we understand that this feticide and infanticide has been a huge problem in India. भारत में हमने मना बंद कर दिया in feticide or gender determination and everything. So there was many cases of infanticide that the girl child is born. The moment they realize this is a girl child, they kill the child immediately, even before the child is completely born. So that is why we have this provision that if any part of that child is taken out of the mother's womb, Even though the child might not have breathed or child might not have been born completely in the sense that the umbilical cord is not cut yet. In that case, still, that child will be considered a human being and killing that child will be considered as homicide. So this clarity is there in our provisions in the law. The provision of culpable homicide clearly states if an infant is killed, then that will be considered homicide for all intent and purpose, and the person will be punished. Okay? Even that child is not completely born, so that we can fight this particular evil of infanticide. Moving on, yes, again the juicy topic, the murder. We have discussed about culpable homicide. Now, culpable homicide and murder, bachon, are very much related offense. Simply understanding, murder is a higher degree of culpable homicide. Culpable homicide अगर अगर बैचलर्स है तो मास्टर्स है मर्डर. अब जिस व्यक्ति को मास्टर्स करना हो वो व्यक्ति बैचलर तो होगा ही. If somebody you say this person is in 12th class, obviously that person has passed 10th class. So all murders are culpable homicide, but that's a higher degree. The murder and culpable homicide are in the same nature. Both are crimes of same nature, but the degree of intention in murder is higher than culpable homicide. Your intent is more clear, is more heinous in murder than culpable homicide. बहुत प्लेन एंड सिंपल शब्दों में समझिए बच्चों कि इन culpable homicide you inflict such kind of injury which creates a likelihood of death. Means you harm someone to an extent that a person might die, and that person actually died. In that case, it will be considered as culpable homicide. But suppose you caused such a harm to that person that created a certainty of death. ध्यान समझिए, likelihood और certainty. Likelihood अगर है तो culpable homicide है, और अगर certainty है तो वो murder है. मैं आपको 10 एग्जांपल्स दूंगा बारी बारी से. यू विल गेट सम क्लैरिटी. फर्स्ट एग्जांपल इज, लेट्स से वही मैंने वुडन स्टिक आई हैव, डंडा आई हैव, एंड डंडे से आई अटैक समबडी एंड आई हिट दैट पर्सनस हेड एंड दैट पर्सन फेल अनकॉन्शियस एंड डाइड. नाउ व्हाट आई डिड culpable homicide because the injury that I inflicted was of such a nature that it created a likelihood of death, that death is possible, and the person actually died. So I was liable for culpable homicide. But suppose I took a sword and I beheaded someone, किसी का गला ही काट दिया. In that case, there is no question of likelihood of death. सर पे डंडा आप किसी के मारे तो वो मर सकता है, लेकिन वो बच भी सकता है. There is also possibility, there is also a probability that the person might live, that person might not die. But if you behead someone, simply sever that person's head from his torso. In that case, what is the case? There is a certainty of death. तो फिर क्या होगा बच्चों? मर्डर होगा. सपोज मैंने किसी शुगर के पेशेंट को चीनी खिला दी धोखे से, जबरदस्ती. देयर इज अ लाइक्लीहुड ऑफ डेथ. शुगर स्पाइक होगा, दैट पर्सन माइट डाई, बट देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी दैट पर्सन माइट लिव ऑल्सो. बट अगर मैंने किसी को साइनाइड खिला दिया, नाउ दैट पर्सन विल डाई फॉर श्योर, बिकॉज दैट इज अ plain and simple toxin. Plain and simple, it's very toxic. It's a poison, and if you eat cyanide, a person will die. That is how it works. Okay, let's take another example. Bodily injury. Suppose I stabbed someone in the abdomen. किसी के मैंने पेट में चाकू मारा, और किसी ने किसी के चेस्ट में चाकू मारा, लंग्स में. In that case, in first case, there is a likelihood of death, thereby making it a culpable homicide. Obviously, if you stab someone in the abdomen, that person might live as well. But if you stab someone in chest, in the heart, if you stab someone properly in heart, that person is going to die. There is next to certainty. In ordinary course of nature, that person will die. So that is considered as murder. कल्पेबल होमिसाइड और मर्डर में बच्चों बेसिकली क्या अंतर जा रहा है बच्चों? एक तरफ लाइक्लीहुड है, यानी ऐसी इंजरी आप इन्फ्लिक्ट कर रहे हैं जिससे व्यक्ति मर भी सकता है और बच भी सकता है, लेकिन एक दूसरे केस में डेथ इज ऑलमोस्ट सर्टेन. सिमिलरली बच्चों नॉलेज बताइए, जनरल नॉलेज का अंडरस्टैंडिंग समझिए. जैसे कि मैं अपने छत पर से पत्थर फेंक रहा हूं नीचे. अब वो पत्थर, there is a likelihood that the stone might fall on the head of someone and the person may die. There is a likelihood. But suppose मैं पत्थर नहीं फेंक रहा, I am throwing grenade from my roof. Now I know that 100% somebody will die. The moment that grenade will fall on the ground, there is going to be destruction. मैं पिन निकाला, ग्रेनेड फेंक दिया, मरना ही मरने हैं लोग. There is possibility. There is the likelihood and possibility and certainty are two different things. Let's take another example. Suppose I accidentally or by I intentionally I simply leave a poisonous snake. मैंने एक जहरीला सांप छोड़ दिया. I release a poisonous snake in a particular residential locality. Now there is a possibility that that snake might bite someone and somebody might die. But there is also a possibility that some person may not die. On the other hand, let's say I released poisonous gas. The Bhopal gas tragedy mein very poisonous methyl isocyanate was released from the new Union Carbide plant. So अगर मैंने suppose वो poisonous gas फैला दी, in that case what will happen? In all probability somebody will die. There is a series Family Man in which terrorists were trying to actually sabotage a chemical facility to release such poisonous gas. That happens. So if somebody does that, it will be considered as certainty of death. Okay. There is a certainty of death in that case. इस तरीके से बच्चों, let's say special knowledge, even if it is considered. Suppose I understand that the person is allergic to a particular medicine and the person might have a reaction. But how allergic that person is bit dicey. So I give that person a particular medicine. Now that person might die, might live. So that is a culpable homicide. But suppose I specifically know that this person is having a pacemaker. So pacemaker laga hai. And one good punch on the chest will cause death of that person. And I gave that punch to one person and the person dies immediately, then I'll be considered to have committed murder. ये बच्चों बहुत ध्यान से समझिए. अगर आपको स्पेसिफिकली पता है अक्यूज्ड के बारे में, सॉरी डिसीज्ड के बारे में, that disease has this particular illness or infirmity, and because of that he is vulnerable to particular injuries or particular actions, and you do that, in that case it will be considered murder and not culpable homicide. ध्यान समझिए, अगर मुझे पता है कि सामने वाले को कोई खास मेडिकल कंडीशन जिसमें कि slight injury on a particular part of the body might cause death of that person, and I do that with my specific knowledge about the infirmity of that person, about the disease of that person, in that case my action will be considered murder, because I'm not using some obscure knowledge, but I am using a very particular information to cause death of that person. Then it will be considered as murder. To give you another example, let's say there is a very famous, interesting case that somebody just consumed a ripe jackfruit. कटहल जो होता है ना बच्चों, उसका जब ripe हो जाता है, it is consumed in many parts of Bharat. So a person consumed ripe jackfruit. Another person saw that happening. This person just consumed a whole bucket of ripe jackfruit. Now what this person does, he goes to that person and offers him a betel nut, pan, fully knowing that this betel nut has contained certain substances which will react with the jackfruit in that person's stomach, and it will cause a very extreme reaction. The person will die. And that actually happens. You can experiment it. You take a ripe jackfruit piece and you spit after eating pan. You spit that juice of the pan on that and you see what happens. It will be enlarged to the size of a football. So the person just had ate jackfruit, and after that he was given beetle, and that person consumed and he blast हो गया वो person फट गया. So because of that, will it be considered as murder or not? The answer is yes. It will be considered murder because this person, the accused, used his specific knowledge. So in murder, the culpable homicide is must. And if the death is intentional, that is murder, no doubt. If the person causes death with an intention of causing death, it is murder as well. There's no difference in that respect. But the bodily injury, what he is doing, must be sufficient in ordinary course of nature to cause death. What is ordinary course of nature? That it should be of such a nature, such an extent to होना चाहिए उस bodily injury का. किसी को आपने पैरों में गोली मारी, पेट में गोली मारी, पीठ पर गोली मारी, थाइस पर मारी, और किसी का हेडशॉट लिया, दोनों में अंतर है. If you shoot someone in their head, on their face, in the chest, then you have committed murder. Similarly, it also depends on the choice of weapon that you use. If you used a blunt object, it might be culpable homicide. But if you use a sharp object, that might be the case of murder. If you simply take a spike and you actually kill someone with that javelin, with that spear, in that case, you will be considered to have committed murder. But if you see blunt weapons, आपने डंडा उठाया, bat से मारा, in that case, there might be a possibility that you have committed culpable homicide. The primary difference is between likelihood and certainty. Culpable homicide, the injury that you have inflicted has a likelihood of death. In murder, the injury that you have inflicted has a certainty. It means ordinary course of nature, it is sufficient to cause death. But if the person still didn't die, that is his luck. But if that person dies, then definitely the liability for murder will be there. So we have discussed very obviously what I have stated is a very simple version of what this particular provision is. Obviously, a far more complicated version awaits you when you are in law school. The law school professor will go in great depth and detail about this thing, but we'll get to know that. Okay. So I hope that much is clear. Murder, there is a huge discussion left about the murder and all. So we'll discuss that in the next video. So thank you so much. Stay tuned for the next video, Culpable Homicide Part 2. If you have any questions, if you need any clarification, just reach me at animesh@mpdnlu.ac.in. So thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video. Okay.